Hello, everybody. Looks like we have a good audience out there today. Welcome to the Data Security for Financial Services webinar. My name is Scott Weinberg. I'm the CEO and founder of Neo Vera. Thanks for joining us today. So, a little bit about Neo Vera. We were started in 2001, and you can all read the text there, but I think what's kind of relevant to how we started this company is our initial engagement. What really kickstarted Neo Vera was a hosting engagement for a large ASP application service provider platform. And it involved a consortium of 5 international banks. And these are all banks you've heard of: Bank of Montreal, Union Bank of California, Australia New Zealand Bank, Barclays Bank in the UK, and First Union Bank, which of course doesn't exist today, but that's a roll-up. And so in building this international bank, that was really the genesis, this platform that was really the genesis of Neo Vera, and the technology that we had to put in place, the security infrastructure that we had to put in place, all the monitoring and alerting, everything we had to put in place really sort of gave us a good foundation and a good benchmark on sort of how we move forward in building the company and doing what we do today. So quick little slide on our main areas of expertise. You can read this: IT consulting, database services. We cover pretty much all of the major databases such as Oracle, SQL Server, enterprise cloud solutions. We offer all flavors of cloud. It's really everything that we do for you as a customer. It's a very hybrid, very customized solution. So let's move on. In terms of how the logistics of this webinar works, I'm going to talk. We've muted all of your mics, and so at the end of the little presentation here, we'll take questions. We'll have a little Q&A session. So I would encourage you to use you have a text box there. You can type questions in. We'll see those questions in your little chat window. And then at the end of this webinar, we'll address those questions. So if 2012 and 2013 was sort of the year of, the cloud, and we hear a lot about the cloud, you can probably think of 2014 as the year of the breach. If you look at all these logos here, JP Morgan Chase, Neiman Marcus, Postal Service, Sony, American Express, Target, etc. They of course have a lot in common. Some of them they spread across a lot of different industries, but they were all breached in 2014. Actually, Target was breached at the end of 2013, but they found out about it in 2014. So these are all big names, and this doesn't even cover all the other names that were breached just in the last year. And I have some information later on. I have some statistics about how many breaches actually get reported, what the percentage of increase is over the last couple of years, and it's pretty alarming. Data security. What is data security all about? Really, it's about protecting the data of your business, keeping it away from unauthorized access, unauthorized modification or destruction, making sure that those folks or those systems that should have access have safe access and uninhibited access. But you also have to control that access. You have to audit it. You have to understand who's touching your data and for what purpose. Who needs to be concerned about data security? Well, really, it's everybody. And it's not just businesses. It's also individuals. I have some interesting stats later on about just individuals who also have been, had some sort of data breach. Financial services, they're a pretty large target. They might not be the number one target for hackers in terms of data breach, but they certainly are a very rewarding target. And in particular, we see a trend towards breaches of credit unions. And why are credit unions interesting? Well, they're interesting because if you compare them to some of the larger financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America, Capital One, all those companies have extremely large IT staff. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of staff, and they have hundreds of people that are literally just focused on data security, network security, and privacy, and regulations and notifications. If you look at credit unions, they really don't have that type of capability on that kind of scale. They have a much smaller IT staff, very limited resources compared to the larger banks in terms of people, in terms of financial resources. And so if you look at things like auditing and testing and analytics, these are things that are not very pervasive in the credit union industry. And so it makes them it makes them a lot easier of a target than it does in your sort of typical banking and financial services. And so because of that, if it's easier to go after, the many thousands of credit unions, I might get a smaller payload, but it's a lot easier to do. Whereas if I go after a large bank, it's very difficult. My reward might be very great, but it's extremely difficult to do that. The ITRC, the Identity Theft Resource Center, just some quick statistics out of 2014. In 2014 alone, 761 breaches were recorded and reported. So this is only what we know about, just because it was reported. If it wasn't reported, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. There's also another alarming statistic that, depending on which report you believe, whether it's from Pew or Pew Research or Gartner, they say up to 90% of businesses don't actually know that they've been breached. But 761 breaches last year, that is 23% higher than that same report from that same organization in 2013. 83 million records were reported as being breached. That's up 45% from 2013. So I would expect in 2015 that number would actually go up again, because if you actually go back to the 2012 ITRC report, those numbers are actually a lot higher. So from 2012 to 13, the percentage of increase is pretty alarming. 13 to 14, it's even higher. I would expect in 2015 that number to continue to go up. DBIR, the Data Breach Incident Report, that's a report that Verizon puts out, and it's a really, really good report. It's a report, you can Google this report, you can download it. It's a nice PDF. Actually, the ITRC report is also something you can just Google and download that. It's got some very, very good information. What Verizon has is they cover a lot of different industries, and they've actually organized their report. It's a pretty comprehensive report. They've organized it by industry, by type of breach. And as I looked at that report, I put some of my own statistics together from what I gleaned out of that. So in terms of just financial services, there were 856 incidents, security incidents, not necessarily breaches in the financial services industry, but out of the 63,437 incidents that were actually reported in this report, so only 1.3% of them related to financial services. And you're like, well, okay, that's not so bad. But now look at the number of breaches, events that actually occurred in data loss. That percentage, so out of 1,367 data loss events, 34% of them related to financial services. So by far, the largest number of percentage of actual breaches in terms of security events happens in financial services. So because the payload for that breach is just so much larger. According to DIBR, 92% of all the data breaches that they analyzed for that report fall into 9 basic patterns. I'm not going to go over all of those patterns, but the top 3 were web application attacks. So these are hackers, whether they're doing denial of service attacks, they're attacking your website, doing malicious attacks against your application services. Payment card systems. So these are, point of sale. Such as what happened with Target. Denial of service attacks. That's kind of related to the web application attacks because that is a method by which hackers use to break into your systems. I like going over the statistics because I think it kind of brings the point home how important it is to really have a good data security process and standards and policies and actually put something in place. So 20%, 1 out of every 5 Americans, according to Pew Research, have been victims of a data breach. I know it's happened to me. At one time I was in New York with one of my older sons, and we were sitting down having sushi. I get a call from American Express, and they said, sir, I see you used your credit card at a bar at this restaurant in New York, but I also see within that same time frame you bought a pizza in LA. Is everything okay? Do you have your card with you? So that's a security breach. There are so many things like that happen all the time, and it's up to everybody to sort of be aware of that and do what they can to really get notified and understand what they can do to protect themselves. 65% of all cyber attacks from all these reports I've collected are of a criminal nature, right? So account numbers get listed online, they get sold, people go in, they use these numbers, they do false charges, or they try to do account takeover, malicious intent. 42% of all of these cyber attacks are industry related. E-commerce number 1, finance in the top 5. E-commerce, of course, number 1 because we all know about Target and Home Depot and Chick-fil-A, etc. The number 1 threat for cyber attacks remains malware. So these are things you all know what they are. You open a link and somebody sent you, whether it's on your phone or in your email, you open that link and next thing you know, you've been exposed. Or in the point of sale system with Target, they allowed a contractor to come in and they installed some malware on their systems. It spread throughout their enterprise, and that's how they got in there. Insider data breaches are increasing at an alarming rate of, it's actually more than 250% per year. And that's why as we look at 2015, I think Chick-fil-A may have been the first one to announce, and I expect that there will be a lot more this year than there were last year. With specific regard to financial services, I think probably the worst thing that happens in a financial services industry is account takeover fraud, right? That's growing at 69% year over year. ACH and wire fraud, the estimate to that so far is about 800 million. So why do we care about data breach? Well, of course, there are a lot of financial reasons, but there are also a lot of regulations, compliance regulations that actually force us as a business to comply. And there are many regulations about this. In financial services, there are probably more regulations regarding data breach and notification than any other industry. And so I just want to list some of them here. How do these things happen? So malware, there's in the point of sale system in the retail space, I think it's probably one of the most well-known malware software. It's called Backoff. It's an interesting name. So malware is certainly number 1. Phishing is a type of it's when somebody sends you an email, and that email, it looks like it comes from, it may look like it comes from an institution that you're very familiar with. If it comes from Bank of America, maybe you are a Bank of America customer, so you see their logo, it looks legitimate enough, you click on it, and next thing you know, you're providing your login credentials to somebody that's not Bank of America. Spear phishing is another method. It's very similar to phishing, except it's very targeted. Spear phishing is a method whereby the attacker actually has a verified list of targets. So this person knows who they're sending their phishing, scamming email to, in the hopes that this is a targeted email. It's almost, you can think of it as a targeted email campaign. Schmishing, which is kind of hard to say, but SMS. This is if I send you something as a text message. Most everybody today has a smartphone, so your smartphones have browsers, and if I send you a text with a link in it, it may be masked somehow. I may make it look like it comes from your telephone provider or your banking provider, or maybe it's Amazon, because how many of us get notified when something happens to our bank account, or when Amazon delivers a package to our door? So, or even FedEx, it's not unusual to sort of click on that link and see what the status of that is. So user error, this is probably one of the most common ones. I forgot to patch a server. I left a laptop unattended. I had a bug in the application software. If you look at some of the other things that are going on, software application bugs are all over the place, and a lot of these things are not even custom software applications. These are these are commercial applications. Look at Microsoft Windows. There are security patches that come out with that all the time. Same thing with Oracle database, SQL Server database. There are patches that come out. They're security related. We have to keep on top of those. Insider misuse is another opportunity for breach. If you look at the case in Morgan Stanley, that was an insider job. This guy just took a bunch of accounts and posted them on the internet and tried to sell them. Denial of service attack. This is it's really a way of getting many systems involved in attacking a single entity. So if I can attack you from all different angles and start to sort of bombard your applications and your websites with malicious intent, the hope is that one of those will actually go through and give me some sort of information about that system, and give me some little tidbit that will help me get in and do what I need to do. Theft, of course, this is a really serious problem, and I think we all know about this. There have been cases of laptops being stolen. They have information. The laptops were not encrypted. Flash drives, hard drives, USB drives get lost. They get misplaced. They get stolen. They go to, if you look at tapes, a lot of folks use Iron Mountain or some other, data archiving service, and people rob those trucks. Things fall off the back of those trucks, and before you know it, data disappears. So let's start talking about some cases of data breach. We all know about the retail segment with Target, Home Depot, Staples, Neiman Marcus, and of course, most recently, Chick-fil-A. In December of 2014, Morgan Stanley, the one I just referred to, so that was an inside job. An employee stole 350,000 records, and he posted 900 of them online. And that was certainly malicious. He got caught, they say, within 8 hours, but 8 hours is a long time. I mean, once that data is on the internet, it's there forever. In the spring of 2014, JP Morgan Chase, there was one device on their network that they forgot to, I don't know if they forgot to, but somehow or other they neglected to update this server and apply two-factor authentication to it in the same way that they had every other server on their network. So everything in their network and their whole array of servers and network devices, everything had two-factor authentication, which means I need something, like an RSA token and a password to get in. This one particular device did not have that, and that's the one device that they eventually found. And so it kind of makes you wonder, how they found that one device, you have to really believe that they knew about the other devices. They just couldn't get into them. But this one, they discovered that it was vulnerable. 8 million small businesses were affected, 76 million households. They got their names, their addresses, their phone numbers, and their emails. With that information, they can do a lot. So one interesting note on the last bullet on this slide, according to the Wall Street Journal, these other financial institutions, Citigroup, E-Trade, ADP, Regions Financial Corp, they believe that they were also attacked by the same hackers that breached JP Morgan. They just don't know if they've actually gotten in yet, or if they've been successful in preventing that breach. For the credit union, Stanford Federal Credit Union, this was not malicious intent, but it was an inside job. An employee of the credit union, they were trying to just send an email to one of their 18,000 members, and accidentally they actually attached to that email the personal information of 18,000 members of that credit union. So, I mean, in this case, they know who they sent the email to, and they know who sent it, and they know what was contained, but still, they had to go then and reissue all the cards for those members. So it still cost them a lot of money. It cost them some brand damage. In October 2014, Palm Springs Federal Credit Union, this is an interesting one because this was also, I can't say whether this was malicious intent or not. According to NCUA, they say they lost the flash drive that was provided to them by the credit union member, a credit union staff member, as part of the audit that NCUA was performing. And so what was on that flash drive was a lot of personal information of the credit union members. TD Bank, they were breached sometime in 2014. What happened with them was they were just late on their notification. So there was a huge fine that they're going to get charged with for late notification. Notification is very important when you have a breach. But they lost 2 backup tapes. They can't really say how they lost it, but most likely there'll be steep fines and 2 years of free credit reports for all their customers that they can identify that were on those tapes. So certainly brand trust damage, and also there's a cost to that. Target and Home Depot, those breaches alone cost credit unions over $90 million, according to CUNA. However, the overall cost, as it's estimated today, to banks in general was over $240 million. But $90 million to credit unions, that's a pretty large percentage when you look at the overall number. And the interesting note here is that the merchant, what did it cost Target? I mean, certainly it cost them lost revenue, it cost them brand share. I have a statistic later on about sort of what the hard costs for them, but they didn't have to cover those credit cards. That came down to the credit unions and the banks, and that is something that is there's at least some things in the works about that are coming down the pipeline, and that may help with on-premise credit card transactions. But still, there's what do we do with online credit card transactions? More on data breach statistics. The financial services industry, as I mentioned before, the top 3 attacks, these are the percentages of all the attacks noted. And so I thought this was an interesting slide because you can look across the different industries and see what percentage of what type of attack was performed against the different industries. So I'll let you just sort of look at this for briefly, but 27% web app, insider misuse accounted for 7%, theft and loss was 3%. And then you can see this. And like I said, this is the DBIR report from Verizon. You can just Google this report and download it. Data breach notification is significant. You need to notify the individuals. You need to provide notification to the media. Of course, there's a regulatory government agency. State laws there are over 47. Every state has their own notification laws. And so depending on where the organization that was breached is based, where the breach occurred, I mean, they may actually be impacted by multiple state laws and government regulatory notification laws. So the federal data breach notification policy, this just provides guidelines as to, how the notification needs to be provided, what compromises a breach, how did it happen, where does it need to be reported. And then this one just talks about what kind of penalties might be incurred depending on the breach and who was affected. Data security controls. What kind of controls should be put in place? And this one covers, it's sort of, it's industry agnostic, but for example, if you look at this and say, well, if I have a point of sale, the first column here, if I have a point of sale intrusion, what kind of attacks should I be guarding against? So point of sale, I should be looking at malware defense systems, right? I should be looking at restricting access to the systems, limited administrator controls and access. I should be looking at, perimeter defense systems, and I should certainly, almost across the board, I should be doing audit logging. How do I prioritize what I need to do to protect myself against certain types of attacks? This is a pretty good slide, and the colors here, sort of the deeper the color, it's supposed to indicate this is where I need to focus. So in financial services, need to standardize configurations across all your infrastructure. So for example, if we look at the case of JP Morgan Chase, they had standards, they just missed one, and that's all it took. Perimeter defense or boundary defense, making sure my firewalls, making sure my monitoring, all these things are in place. My audit trails, incident response is when something happens, how do I respond to that, and making sure that it's timely enough, because the fact of the matter is no business is going to be able to prevent every single type of breach. The hackers they're very sophisticated today, and the fact is we don't know what else they're going to come up with, and it's very difficult to defend against something when you don't know how it's going to happen. Taking a look at Target, what they are doing today, it's pretty interesting, right? They replaced their CEO, and they also replaced 7 out of 10 members of their board. From a technical perspective, they have started to enhance the monitoring and logging. They put in application whitelisting of point of sale systems. So that just sort of says, they're trying to protect the perimeter of where people can get into their systems, because point of sale, it's there, it's out there, the public, I can see it, I can touch it. Not every checkout counter at a retail place is attended by somebody. They're, for the most part, many of them are unattended. And all I'd have to do is put on a red shirt and a black pair or a tan pair of pants, and I can walk into Target and they think I work there. Improving segmentation of the network and applying security rules. Developing a comprehensive governance process. So this is really, how do we manage our systems? And how do we patch them? How do we remediate them? How do we audit? How do we report? One of the biggest things for Target, and this is really more relevant to the breach, was the vendor access that they had. They they had, I guess, over 445,000 team member and contractor passwords that they had to reset. So I don't know how many of those were actually contractor or vendor user IDs and passwords, but that's a lot when you think about that. So it sort of tells you how they ran their business as well. So it seems like they weren't really that aware, or they weren't really that concerned with security as a whole. But they're taking action now. Is it enough? I don't think so, because one of the things they don't talk about is they don't talk about encryption of data. They don't talk about how they protect data that's actually stored. They talk more about what they're doing to protect the data and the access to the data, but they're not necessarily, and how do they protect against malicious activity from the point of sale system, but they're not really talking about how do they secure the data while it's at rest, while it's in place. So what can everybody do? I think one of the number one things is you have to educate employees on, if you look at the methods of attack, they need to understand what phishing is. You cannot assume that everybody knows what that is and what the different methods are. You can't assume everybody's reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and you have to get that information out there. You have to make sure that everybody goes through some sort of education, and that this education is recurring. Sensitive data, you need to encrypt sensitive data, not just on your storage devices, but when you back up your computers, your laptops, your iPads, your iPhones, those backups also need to be protected. So if you can encrypt them, encrypt them. Laptops, I can tell you personally, as a company at Neo Vera, our laptops, all the data on all our laptops are encrypted. I lose a laptop, somebody needs my password to get in and read the data on that laptop. Use of complex passwords, it's different everywhere you go. Certainly there's no real uniform standard, but one of the generally accepted industry standards is complex passwords, change them at least every 90 days. Of course, audit of operations for every bit of data that is accessed and moved. So it's email, it's when I move data from one place to another. There's software out there today that can understand if I'm copying and pasting data. So I can tell you some of the institutions we've worked at, you're not allowed to plug in any external device into one of the corporate laptops or desktops. They've disabled all USB devices. If you try and copy and paste anything, especially if you're a contractor, it just doesn't work. So you can't do a screen print, you can't copy, you can't paste. It makes it kind of difficult to work as a consultant there, but that's what they do. Next. So the cost, the risk, the benefit, I think we all understand this. It's not free. To put something in place, it costs money. But if you look at the benefit, if you can minimize the risk, especially in financial services, if you can protect member data, if you can minimize the risk of account takeover, then you can minimize the risk of customer attrition, minimize the risk of government penalties and fines. Nobody ever wants to show up on the first page or even the third page of the Wall Street Journal, and you avoid civil and criminal penalties. So, of course, the cost far outweighs the risk. If you don't do enough, it's pretty simple. You will eventually suffer a data breach. We just don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to happen. But if you can know when it happens and actually act, and if you have a plan in place, you'll be better off than most of your neighbors. And you never want to have what happened. You never want to have what happened to Target CEO. They replaced him. That's not a great feeling. bottom line, in most cases, and this is really across all industries, the cost to prevent a data breach is far less than the cost of mitigation and resolution, and of course, litigation. So here's how we can help you. Just so happens that one of our practices is security consulting. So we do security policies, we do IT assessments, we use our expertise and our knowledge in this area to sort of help you figure out what's going on. We look at a lot of different things, and we've worked at several credit unions in this area, other financial institutions. We'll go do a physical inspection to some degree, and some of the things we've uncovered was it was kind of interesting. At one place I was working at, I noticed an ATM machine. It was just outside the cafeteria. It wasn't really secured against the wall. But there was a network cable sticking out from the ATM machine, and when we traced that network cable back, we found that it was actually plugged into, in their network closet, it was plugged into the same network switches that their tellers were plugged into, and all of their IT department. And so that's generally not a good thing. That's not a good thing. So I think at this point, we're ready to entertain some questions. I want to thank you for attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. Not sure if we're going to open up the mic for some of you. I think we can do that on a yeah, so actually for a few of you, we've actually opened up the mics. So for Denise and Frank and Lynn, if you guys have any questions or comments, we'd welcome that. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, great. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. I hope you found it informational and useful. Thanks.